My name is Johnny Vieira. I am working with Montes, and I will be introducing the webinar now. So we are starting. Thank you everyone for joining us and for registering and going through this journey with us. LIFE ENPLC, European Network for Private Land Conservation. We started this project this year, well, actually last year in December, and we are addressing various topics within the private land conservation in Europe. And actually, this project is a result of two previous projects that have been working this theme recently. LIFE ELCN, the European Land Conservation Network, and LIFE from the European Landowners Organization side. So these two projects decided to join forces and work together in this new project, LIFE ENPLC. Within this new project, we have a working group that is specifically dedicated to volunteering and to citizen science. And this webinar today is being organized by our working group on volunteering. So volunteering has been growing and getting more and more relevance in terms of private land conservation and conservation in a general way. It's been proving itself as a very useful tool, not just to provide manpower and more people to manage land, but also a tool to involve people and to provide capacity building. And that is what we are going to be talking about for these 2 days, and specifically, how can we use volunteering on private land conservation? What can landowners learn from volunteers, and also the other way around? Because we know a few projects, and they will present on these sessions that have proven that the knowledge goes both sides. It goes both ways. So everyone can win, and volunteering is really a very important tool. So I really hope that on the questions and answers and the discussion parts of the webinar, we'll have the chance to hear from every side, from the landowners, from the NGOs, from the volunteers. Tomorrow we will have a session with testimonials from landowners and volunteers. All of them have been involved somehow in these kinds of projects. So the idea is that this webinar works as, food for thought and a boost to the discussion around these topics, and hopefully for new projects and new ideas. So I will thank everyone again, and with no further delays, I will pass the word to Tilman Disselhoff. He's the president of Eurosite, but no one better to introduce than himself. Thank you, Tilman.
Thanks, Tony. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on behalf of Eurosite as well. Today I'll be wearing two hats. I'm used to that. I'm a NABU employee, but I'm also the president of the board of Eurosite. And so in this double function, I'm welcoming you as well. Johnny put it very nicely. The purpose of this webinar is to see how conservation volunteering can work on private land, and we'll hear some interesting examples of that. The overall purpose of this is bringing together private landowners and conservationists. That's the purpose of the project in which this webinar is organized, but it's also the purpose of our organization, Eurosite. More generally, we want to reach out to other stakeholders and make sure that conservation is integrated into the society at large. We see this as an opportunity to collaborate and to learn from one another. So in that culture, let's say, and in that overall objective, I see this webinar as well. It's the first one that is being organized by our project. So this is a premiere for everyone. It's also something that was not foreseen in the project application. It's a spontaneous initiative by the working group, which is very nice. It's also obviously a reaction to the fact that we cannot meet in person, or we could not for a long time. I should put it that way. I hope this will change again very soon. And with that, welcome everyone. I'll speak later about the content of the project itself and say a few words about that. But for the time being, just welcome on behalf of your side, and I'll pass over to Jürgen Tuck of the ELO.
Thank you, Tilman. Also on my behalf, I would like to welcome all of the participants. My name is Jürgen Tuck. I'm a scientific director for the European Landowners Organization. Now, the European Landowners Organization, or with its acronym ELO, is an advocacy group for private landowners in all of the EU member states towards European Commission and towards the European Parliament. Those private landowners, we have 2.3 million paying members all over Europe. They are grouped in 65 local organizations. And let's say in the Brussels office, we make sure that, let's say, most of their concerns are shared with European Commission and European Parliament. On the other side, if new initiatives are taken by the Commission or the Parliament, we make sure that they are reaching our members. Our members have, I would say, 4 main activities. We have private landowners active in agriculture, in forestry, nature conservation, and in, let's say, efforts to conserve cultural heritage elements. There is an increasing interest in our membership group on private land conservation, on nature conservation. For that reason, almost 15 years ago, we set up the Wildlife Estates label, which was an initiative we took together with the European Commission, and which is, let's say, private landowners who have an estate or who have property where they are doing nature conservation. And if that is of a high quality, there is a system in which they are systematically monitored, and they can get the Wildlife Estate label for their efforts. We have been participating in a number of LIFE projects, and 5 years ago we participated for the first time in a preparatory LIFE, specifically on the possibilities of private land conservation towards individual private landowners. Now the LIFE Plus project, which we called Land is Forever, so we got the same anonym LIFE as the program, it prepared policy recommendations towards the European Commission concerning a set of tools to be used to promote private land conservation. Now, we have seen that a large majority of those tools were very useful to protect small wildlife in fields, in meadows, and were contributing in general to the collaboration between the main stakeholders in the countryside. And I'm including farmers, private landowners, hunters, nature conservation organizations. What we have seen is that a number of issues were very important to further develop private land conservation tools. First thing we noticed that is that we have to make sure that the set of tools we're offering to private landowners is also respecting the variety of private landowners, because the situations of those private landowners can be very different. We have seen that application and monitoring requirements should be equal and feasible for individual owners, but also for nature conservation organizations, because if we are asking, let's say, a too high effort to both of them, there is a risk that, let's say, their main activities are becoming endangered. Tools should respect also the economic value of the land. That's especially important for individual private landowners. And for that, tools and their compensation mechanisms should be organized in a framework where private landowners can trust on the long term. So not only short-term measures which can change every moment, but we should have a look at the longer term. Very important is that we get a two-way knowledge exchange in agreeing on contracts, this is absolutely critical to encourage trust and cooperation. And we have to make sure that we are offering the necessary flexibility in case of threats undermining the values of the land. And for instance, climate extremity or diseases or other aspects not under the control of the landowners are important elements in this. And then we have to make sure that we support in insurance and liability of private landowners when they're opening the land for public. That's not always the case, but is a very important aspect. Now, private landowners are becoming more and more important, and I'm speaking as well about the individual private landowners as the nature conservation organizations. If we have a look at the European Biodiversity Strategy 2030 set up by the European Commission, you're asking 30% of all of the European land under protection, to place it under protection, and to have 10% of the total land area under strict protection. This is not something our governments can do without the active participation of as well nature conservation organizations as individual private landowners. Those two, we have to be honest, have not always been each other's best friends in the past decades, but we see today that more and more they find their way towards each other. They start to cooperate, they start to exchange information and knowledge. And I would say that it's exactly what we are trying to reach or further develop within the ENPLC project, European Networks for Private Land Conservation. It's trying to bring those different networks together. Very interesting is that we had two live projects, one for the nature conservation organizations, one for the individual private landowners, and that quite a number of recommendations were very similar. So we are both asking for a set of instruments. We have identified those instruments, and we have seen that they are not different between one project and the other. So it's now becoming very important to really implement those instruments and to join our expertise. We have on one side individual private landowners owning land, having an increased interest in nature conservation actions. On the other side, we have nature conservation organizations also owning land, having a specific expertise in nature conservation. So let's say we really have to join forces to make sure that we get the most out of it and making sure that we halt the loss of biodiversity in Europe. To do that, the role of volunteers is extremely important. I think that's very visible for nature conservation organizations, as most of them are larger organizations with a lot of volunteers, but also for the individual private landowners, volunteers are very important. Let's say their initiatives are most of the time smaller scaled as it are individual estates, but there too we see that the cooperation with volunteers is very important. And I think that with joining our knowledge, sharing our expertise would be very beneficial for both, as well for the individual private landowner as for the nature conservation organizations. Johnny, I hope not only you, but that we all have a very interesting workshop, but I'm very sure we are going to learn a lot from each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Well, my name is Carlos Sanchez. I am the Director of Research of Fundación Artemisan, one of the members of this project. And I'm going to be the moderator. So yes, I'm going to be the person keeping an eye on the people presenting. And well, just as a very quick reminder, we have a very exciting program for today. We're going to start with the first panel is about volunteering for nature conservation. Where do we stand? After that, we will have a short period of questions and answers. Then we will have time for coffee or tea. And we will start later the second panel, which is titled Challenges for Volunteering on Private Land. And as it has been said before, we have been working very hard in these panels. So we think it's a very, very valuable information. And as Jürgen has said now, it is clear that the role of volunteers on private land is crucial, and that's the aim of this webinar. Well, we're going to start with the first panel. Well, first of all, I would like to say that our colleague Inga Rosinska from the Latvian Fund for Nature hasn't been able to present today, But well, there will be a report with the outcome of this platform meeting. This will be shared with all participants, so we can send this document after the webinar. So we're gonna get started with our first speaker. Just a gentle reminder: the speakers have about 20 minutes of time. If they go beyond that limit, I will say something. So first speaker is Sarah Ornelas, who works as a conservation technician for Associação BioLiving from Portugal, who deals with managing and developing several environmental projects and education activities. And the title of her talk is Managing Private Micro-Reserves for Nature Conservation with Volunteers, Challenges and Advantages. Sarah, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much, Carlos. Good morning, everyone. I will share my screen so that you can see my presentation. I think that you, yeah, thank you so much for the feedback. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Ellis, and I'm here representing BioLiving Association. And today I'll talk a little bit about managing private micro-reserves for nature conservation volunteers, challenges and advantages. So just to say a little bit about our association, it is a non-profit NGO founded 5 years ago. Our motto is Nature and Education for All, and we are a multidisciplinary team. Most of us are biologists, but we also have people from different areas like forestry and engineer, tourism, science communication, even political science. So we are a very multidisciplinary team that help us doing this nature conservation with different scopes. So we are in Portugal, here in the north center of Portugal, in the district of Aveiro. And just to say our main 4 spheres of action, we work towards nature conservation in the field, but we also do environmental education and training activities, also in schools. We do consulting, scientific advice and monitoring for public or private entities. And in all of our activities, we work towards social inclusion. So today here, I'll talk specifically about one of our projects, which is called Lusitanica. This project is dedicated to nature conservation and to sustainable and integrated valorization practice of the territory. This project aims to implement micro-reserves to conserve and to value biodiversity that flourishes here in this region of Portugal. But to do that, we want to engage communities, the local community that actually lives there, and also a lot of volunteers that help us working there and preserving the biodiversity that occurs here. So just to show you a little bit of what we have been doing. So 5 years ago, when we were founded, we were able to manage this small piece of land. It was an ancient maize field. And as you can see in all the surrounding area, we have eucalyptus plantation, which in Portugal, they are spread all over, mostly in the center of Portugal, because they are used for pulpwood industry. They are exotic, they are not from here. So here in this land, it was given us the opportunity to transform this place in a native forest. So I'll show you how it is 5 years after. You can see here a barn, and it was not any tree planted here. So 5 years ago we planted, and now it is like this. The barn is still there, but we cannot see it anymore. In only 5 years, we have grown a native forest here. And it is an oasis. It's a place where our native biodiversity can flourish here. So we are trying to restore these habitats with the help of a lot of volunteers that I will show you in a bit. Here is another perspective of this micro-reserve. And only 2 years ago, we were able to manage this biggest land, which is this one here in brown. Also, as you can see in all the surrounding area, we had again eucalyptus plantation. And here in this land, it was also eucalyptus. So what we are doing now is taking out this exotic species, the eucalyptus, and planting new native trees to create there a forest, a native one. So, but all of this is made with the help of many volunteers. Here we have a university in the city of Aveiro, which is very close to the place where we have our lands, and most of our volunteers come from the university. Although most of them are from biology, we have volunteers from all different areas, from laws to medicine to engineering. And here in the field, we work together toward this main objective. So here you can see some of the things that we do. We have in one of the lands an old water mill. Besides preserving nature conservation, we will also try to preserve these cultural heritage buildings that we can find in our lands. So in one of the lands, we have this water mill that was completely covered with brambles. We could not even see it. It was also full with soil, so we are cleaning it and we want to restore it. Also, we have this very important cultural heritage structure, which is a water channel, an ancient one, made to connect the water from the river to the water mill in order to make it work. So we were also finding out where it were, because it was completely covered with soil, and now we are restoring it as well. We also create some pounds for nature wildlife, and we collect the seeds, the local ones, and we do the seedlings in order to then plant in our micro reserves with native trees and bushes, but preserving the local genetics of these plants. But how do we get to manage these private lands? How do we get to them? How do we get to manage it? How do we reach the owners? So a very important thing that we have, and a great advantage, is that we know some people that have always lived there in this region. They are the grandparents of a member of the association. So since they have always lived here in the region, they are a great advantage in talking to the private owners. Most of them are very old, and if we get to them coming from different places of Portugal, talking to them of what we are doing there, of what we would like to do with their lands, maybe they will not accept it, they will not trust us. But since we have this help of the grandparents of our member, it is much easier to get to the private owners. First of all, to get to know who they are, because here we have small patches of fields, so we have very different private owners. So with the help of them, we get to know who they are, and then we get to talk to them and to explain them what we do. So here in this picture, you can see we were talking to one of the owners of a very special place here. This owner has huge oaks in a place which is surrounded by eucalyptus. These oaks are very old, very big, and they are very important because they support one of the biggest populations of stag beetles, which is the biggest beetle in Europe, and it is endangered. So here in only these 4 or 5 oaks, they have a huge population and a very important one in the region. So we talk to them about the importance of it. And after we talk to them, after they came to an activity with us there, they let us manage their land. So this is one of the things that we do. If the owners, they don't want to sell it, we make an agreement with them. We say, okay, so the land is yours, but if you agree with us, we can manage our land in order to preserve the native forests that occur here. So it was what happened here. So you can see here the huge oaks, and now we are managing all the fields surrounding it. Also here on the right, it was another private owner. This is connected with our first micro reserve, the one that was a cornfield, and then we planted their native forest. It is connected with it, and we have a stream that connects this micro reserve with our first one. And this owner here he is very old and he did not want to clean it by hand. He did not want to pay anyone to clean. So he were just going to put some chemicals. It would contaminate the water and contaminate all the good work that we have been doing in our also micro reserve to preserve our biodiversity. So we talked to them, we explained them what we're doing. So we are now also managing it. We clean it, we plant also native trees. So this is a way that we get to manage the lands without actually acquiring it. We just get to an agreement with the landowners. Sometimes it is difficult because even if we say that we are doing the best of the land, we clean it for free with the help of volunteers, we plant native trees. Sometimes they don't want, because the land it's their property. They don't want anyone going there and cleaning it, even though we are doing it for free and we are doing the best. But sometimes it's difficult to get to the landowners, and sometimes we have some very great results like here. We can also acquire some of the lands. We have done it with this very big one, and we are now managing it, preserving it with the help of volunteers, and also trying to restore these cultural heritage buildings that we have here, like the water mill. But all of this is only possible because we have the help of many, many volunteers. As I've told before, most of our volunteers are from the university, but we also have volunteers that came to us from places around here, the district, that get to know what we are doing there and that come to us. We have even volunteers from that local place, that village where we work, that get to know that we were working there, and they meet us and they work with us. Even older people that lives there in this village sometimes also join us and get curious to know what we are doing, and sometimes stay a little bit with us, talk with us, and even help us. So with the help of many volunteers, we have been able to preserve and conserve a lot of species, some of them endangered, some of them endemic here of Portugal and Spain. We have been able to restore huge areas of habitats. Most of them were covered with these exotic species, and now we have transformed it with the native forests. We have been also, with the help of volunteers, controlling a lot of invasive species that occurs in our micro reserves and in the surrounding area, in order not to spread more. And when the volunteers come to our activities, it's also very interesting to see this intergenerational engagement and interaction, because, as I have told, sometimes we have older people coming, local people, and sometimes we have families. Mainly when you have plantations, a lot of families come and join us. So it's very interesting to see all of these intergenerational interactions. Most of them are between the university students and the other people. While they are working, they are talking between each other, they are exchanging experiences, learning a lot from the older people, and also the older people from the community also learns a lot and get to know different things from the university students. So it's also a great environment to improve these intergenerational engagements. Also, it's good for the university to get a little bit away from the computers, from the work, and get in contact with nature and working physically. But it's also very important for their mental well-being, because while they are there, they are working with nature, they are surrounded by nature, and they get to relax and just being there, working and talking to the friends. So it's also a good thing that we can see that the volunteers take from these activities in the fields. And it's also very important to raise environmental awareness in an informal way, because while we are working, we are always finding some animals like frogs or snakes, which are not very attractive to a lot of the volunteers. So it's very interesting to grab them and talk to them a little bit about them, about their importance, and trying them to touch it and to see that they're not venomous, they will not make any harm. And so we try to increase their environmental awareness in this way as well, since we are all doing the work in the field. And it's a better environment to raise this kind of awareness, because we are in the field. Besides national volunteers, we also work with international ones. We do international work camps in partnership with the Portuguese Institute of Youth and Sports. We have done 10 international work camps since we were created. So since 5 years ago, we have already made 10. Some of them were in our micro reserves. Some of them were in the region here surrounding. Here you can see we have controlled these huge acacias, which are invasive species, with the help of all these volunteers. And since these volunteers came here for a 12 days period, it's a very intense work, and we are able to do a huge amount of work in a short period. Here you can see another picture of other international work camp where we have removed a huge amount of these invasive aquatic species as well. So thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any question, please, I'll be happy to answer to it. And I will leave here some of the places where you can get in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your very interesting presentation. Yeah, the questions, there's yeah, we have later on a little bit of time for questions. We are doing quite well in terms of time, and we're gonna follow. Sorry, we're gonna remain in the Iberian Peninsula. This is gonna be a quite Iberian panel. So we're gonna continue with Pablo de la Nava from CEO BirdLife Spain, who is the project manager of Life Followers, and his talk is titled Life Followers, Experience, Outcomes, and Lessons Learned. So Pablo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you very much to the Life ENPLC to have me here. Let's see what Life Followers brought us as a preparatory project of the Life ESC call. I'm going to share my screen. Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Well, as I said, thank you very much to the ENPLC project to have me here. And let's start of what we are. So BirdLife is the Spanish Ornithology Society, member of BirdLife International, as some of our panelists here. We come together in a huge, big organization. It comes with NABU, SPEA, LIPU, all over Europe, America, Asia, etc. All over the world, really, is the world's largest environmental organization with over 120 partners. And as you can see, all over the world, we have some country programs. We participate in nature conservation. Well, all started in 1954 with 6 visionaries, 6 researchers and enthusiasts on conserving birds. But mainly, it all started with volunteers. And it has been since then one of our main forces. We have, of course, workers in BirdLife, but also we have a huge volunteering force that help us to achieve all our objectives and to push forward on nature conservation. That is so that we managed to live already 67 years and almost getting to those 20,000 members, which pushing our power in society, are also in lobbies and politics. That in the end is what we're trying to achieve, try to influence on nature conservation through politics, through people, through life in general. Well, how do we do that, or what's our goal? It's we want our rich in biodiversity where humans and nature live together. But how do we do that? We call it the conservation triangle. This, in the end, you can resume that in a sentence that is, to preserve, you need to know. And this triangle comes with 3 points: research, conservation, and education. Well, all of them are the same importance. First, we have to know what we have with researching. Then we need to know what we can do in order to conserve the place or the species. And of course, we need to let the people know, all people, not only interested people, general public, what do we have and what we are doing to preserve that values. So in the end, we will focus on that that third point of the triangle, which is sensibilization, diffusion, and education, mainly on volunteering. Well, volunteering, what drives volunteering is improving reality, transforming the world. But if we focus now more on environmental volunteering, what we are trying to do is reduce the negative impact of humans on the environment and enhance the value of the natural heritage. Well, there you can see some of the pictures of the project. What led us also to some other outcomes, actually, that we are really happy with it. So volunteering in Sea Over Life in general led us to speak about almost 15,000 volunteers per year. That's a lot. But what we call volunteer is different what we call in Spain, or what we call a volunteer in Europe. We realized that throughout the project, and through thanks to all the international volunteers that came to help us with our objectives. Well, in Sea Over Life, volunteers are working on local groups, on monitoring projects, volunteering projects specific on natural protected areas, and some others as well, offices, events, different ways of collaboration that help us to reach our goals. Well, then this lead us to Followers project, to Life Followers, which was a project that was designed by Sea Over Life in 2016. And when by December 2016, the European Solidarity Corps came to life. And with the help of and the force of this European Solidarity Corps and the financing of the LIFE project, together with the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, we tried to develop a project to help mainly young people between 18 and 30 years old to be involved in Natura 2000 conservation. And also, mainly, we have focused on this objective, which is to help them gain experience and knowledge through non-formal training and personal experience. Well, I can say we achieved that, but also we have a small black point on this project that we didn't manage to continue it. There were in the beginning 2 years we have asked for an amendment for a year more. But we couldn't make it to continue the project indefinitely. And it's something that really worried us, because there were many people that was behind all those 300 volunteers that help us to achieve amazing outcomes. Well, this experience and knowledge, we managed to do it thanks to raising awareness on the Natura 2000 network through these three columns: researching, monitoring, and conservation on Natura 2000 network. And now let me play you the video of the project just for 1 minute.
conocer la red Natura 2000 es fundamental si queremos preservar los espacios naturales, y si la gente lo desconoce es imposible que se pueda conservar.
Recomendaría un montón este voluntariado, es súper divertido, cambia mucho la manera de ver tu entorno.
Se puede aprender muchísimo, se tiene un contacto directo con la naturaleza y con aquello que quieres proteger.
Está siendo una experiencia a nivel personal y profesional increíble.
Voluntariados como este te enseñan cosas que no aprendes en las aulas.
Estamos atravesando una gravísima crisis medioambiental. Por tanto, esta experiencia en la que los jóvenes participan, se conciencian, creo que es clave para poder afrontar el futuro.
Well, that's towards the project, and it gives me goosebumps still, because it was a very personal implication that I had with it, and it's also very happy with the results. Well, we work on 5 phases. First, we recruited the people. We had over 1,300 applications. Then, with every one of the volunteers that participated, was just over 300 people. We did an personal introduction with them, and formation with over 500 of hours of formation with all of them. Then they reached the second phase. It was learning and practice together with among them, and together with mentors and tutors. Then they reached the third phase, where they started to work more or less solo under mentoring. Mainly of course office and intensive work that they have worked with us for 2 months, and some others that they were just participating on our field activities along the 3 years of the project. And in the end, of course, we give them the certificate, which was very important, as we will see later on with them for the Spanish volunteers mainly. Well, we managed to work in 15 different places all over Spain. And as you can see, some of the numbers were quite amazing, working over 30 Natura 2000 spaces, 316 volunteers, over 57,000 hours worked. That means almost 12,000 days of work. And we calculated estimated value of 700,000 euros. And so, I mean, we were very happy with the main outcomes. We created what we call the Life Followers family. Everyone was very happy interacting, not only among them, as my other partner said before, also in interaction with the local people, with the different generation that was able to participate in the project. Some of the other numbers we have there, saving living animals from traps, recovering invasive plants. I mean, we were very happy with the outcomes, but also the main outcomes we reach are, as you can see in this slide, we involve the future of Europe, young people that wanted to take part in the natural environment conservation. We help to increase awareness on Natura 2000 network and explain the importance of it in 2 ways. I mean, for the participant, also for general public, on our diffusion and sensibilization activities. And of course, we managed to give them the experience, personal and professional, and help them to create the first networking and professional networking contacts, thanks to the collaboration among other projects, live and non-live projects, local and national, and even international projects. So, conclusions, as I said, we managed to get to know the difference between what is a young volunteer in Northern Europe and what is a young volunteer in Southern Europe. It could sound strange, but it really is. I mean, people from Northern Europe that came to participate in the project, they were always seeking for personal experience, Of course, the companies in their home countries, they value their participation on volunteers, and they find that volunteering is part of formal and non-formal education, whereas in Spain and some southern countries, Portugal, Italy, Greece, what the youngsters look in volunteering is professional experience. It's not valued by most of the companies, and it's just part of their training. Also, they are doing it while they're looking for a job, which it leads them to a low commitment rate in general. Whereas in Northern Europe, they do it before looking for a job. We had a lot of problems with that during the volunteering, because many of the volunteers, if they find a job during their volunteering period, they quit. So that's why it's low commitment, or they prefer a short-term commitment. In the end, volunteering in Northern Europe, they find experience, they look for experience, whereas in Southern Europe, they look for a resource to get a job. This is changing anyway, because now we're living in a globalized world, and this we see that during these 3 years is already changing. So it is quite good. And this graphic represents what we have just said. I mean, you can see in Portugal, Spain, and Italy, even in Greece, these initiatives, as an Erasmus Plus or European Solidarity Corps, make the young people feel more European. Whereas if you find on the other side of the graphic, Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, France, some other countries, they don't feel more European, or they just in a small rate, smaller rate. But we're talking about almost 90% in Portugal and in Spain, where these initiatives lead to the young people feel more European. And also this also in Europe in general, this Eurobarometer, more and more young people are focusing on volunteering, on volunteering activities. So I think this is a good future, long and short-term expectations to see many people involved in volunteering. Also in Spain, what they said before pre-COVID situation, there will be more public financing on volunteering and on environment and conservation. And also, to finish, it leads us to 4 questions. In the future, volunteering will be valued by companies in Southern Europe as much as they do in Northern Europe. What is the real future in volunteering? What model are we focusing to? The Anglo-Saxon model, where there's a big society, where all the volunteering, all the social and environmental activities will be led by organizations, NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, or this could be like a way of democratization of public services, empowering people. That's the Anglo-Saxon model. Then we have the Mediterranean model, which is the government will finance of these organizations and will help to achieve the objectives of conservation, of social development, etc. And of course, this is a question I bet all our panelists will have sometimes come to their desk saying, what is the difference between volunteering and unpaid work? So there's many questions that have probably many answers, and it will lead us to probably another Congress. So nothing else. Just thank you very much again for having me, and hope I didn't get beyond those 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thanks for your very nice presentation. I think, yeah, there's a lot of food for thought from your presentation and the previous one. Just a reminder that you can write questions in the chat that we will take later on. And yeah, we're doing quite well in terms of time. So we're gonna continue. We go back again to Portugal. As I said before, this is a quite Iberian session. And the next speaker is Margarida Silva from Montes. Montis takes part in this LIFE project, Associação para a Gestão e Conservação da Natureza. I hope that my Portuguese went well. And the title of the talk is LIFE Volunteerscapes, Managing Long-Term Volunteers for Nature Conservation in Private Land. Margarida, the floor is yours.
Hi, hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Can I just get a heads up if you are seeing my screen?
Yes, but you have to, yeah, if you can put it in presentation. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. How do I? Okay. Right. So I'm going to present a little bit about the project Life Volunteerscapes, which was a project that I have been managing for the past 3 years. I'm a conservation technician in Montijo, which is the coordinator of this project. And I will present a little bit about the association further on. So this project, Life Volunteerscapes, was created in 2018. It's a project financed by the program LIFE of the European Communion, like a commission, like LIFE ENPLC. And it has been executed for 3 years between 9 partners, and we had an extension throughout 2021. So the partnership was between 9 associations in Portugal, public and private, and NGOs. And the project had main goals that I will speak a little bit further on. The coordinated beneficiary, as I said, was Montijo. Montijo is an association para a gestão e conservação da natureza, so management and conservation of nature. And specifically, Montijo in this project was testing the use of volunteering for nature conservation and biodiversity activities in private lands. It was a little bit to complement the LIFE and LCN that we had at the time, and that Johnny will present in the panel in this afternoon, so I won't speak much about it. But basically, our volunteers in the LIFE Volunteerscapes worked to the goal of ALCN as well. The project had 2 main goals, nature and biodiversity conservation, and an active enrollment and capacitation of entities. Either it be the entities that receive the volunteers throughout the project, but also entities that collaborated with the project implementation. So in activities of volunteering and so on. But especially the project had the objective of receiving volunteers from the European Solidarity Corps for nature conservation. So as a live preparatory project, we wanted to test out using these volunteers from this platform that the Europe has to work for conservation. The goals of the project was to receive 175 volunteers from the European Solidarity Corps platform, and then we had goals for nature conservation and goals for involvement of the community. So the conservation ones, we wanted to control an area of invasive species at least of 69 hectares, enroll more than 3,000 people and organizations in the work that we did these 3 years, private companies, NGOs, private landowners. So this specifically to Montijo. We a little bit like Bioliving did, like Sarah presented. We have 2 types of lands where we work. Either they can be bought by the association, in that case it's ours, or we make management protocols with the owners. We have at the moment 26 properties under our care, more than 170 hectares, and only around 18 hectares of these 170, more than 170 are Montes. The other ones are privately owned, and we manage them for the owners. We have some that are owned by companies and others that are owned by private families, like a person that owns a land, and we started managing it for them. The reasons are a bit the same, again, as Biodiversity presented, people that that the properties were passed on by the family, and they have left these rural areas. So we started managing these lands for them so they wouldn't be abandoned, and we could restore the ecosystems that used to be in these properties to make them more resilient to wildfires. It was all the work of our volunteers that kind of motivated more landowners to join our work and to join the association with management protocols. I will talk a little bit about the results afterwards, but basically during these 3 years of project, we increased the number of properties that we had under management, and we involved more than 7 private landowners, which is a good result, taking into account that most of the lands are abandoned and it's very difficult to reach the current owners of them. We also worked with the replicability and involvement of other LIFE projects in this project, not only the ones that also had the main beneficiaries of this project involved in the lives, but others outside of the partnership of Life Volunteerscapes. We worked to improve the volunteer skills that were with us, and as I said before, the capacitation of associations to use volunteering programs for nature conservation. So how did it work being a volunteer in Life Volunteerscapes? So the volunteers needed to be between 18 and 30 years old, have the availability to be with us for at least 2 months until up to 1 year, and they needed to be motivated with initiative and team spirit to be in big teams and such in very isolated areas as it was in Monty's case. We had 2 volunteering programs accessible for the volunteers, a joint volunteering program, which we tried to create a program where the volunteers could engage with more than one of the partners from this project. So we were, as I said, 9 partners, and the idea was having volunteers rotating at least 2 months between as many partners as they wanted. And this was specifically to try to exchange knowledge between all the associations, and it would provide the volunteer different perspective on how to work for nature conservation. As I said before, the partners in this project were NGOs and public entities, private companies, etc. So although we all worked for nature conservation, we all had our differences working for it. So it was the objective of this program to share this knowledge with the volunteers, and the normal volunteering, where the volunteer would choose to be just with one association, as I said, for 2 months or until 1 year. They had a couple of advantage already from the European Solidarity Corps guidelines that they were afterwards kind of rebuilt a little bit for the Life Volunteerscapes. Oops, sorry. And this was, they were given working accident insurance, the capacitation and general monitoring and follow-up of their work in the field with the technicians, reimbursement of the travels to and from the project, and a pocket money for lodgement and food, up to 20 years per volunteering day. This differed between all the associations that worked in the project. Some of us gave lodging already for the volunteers, and we would decrease the amount that they will receive per volunteering day just for the food, because they didn't have to cover the accommodation. But being a volunteer was a little bit more than that. And tomorrow we are going to have 3 volunteers, actually 4, for another different talk. We are going to have 4 volunteers speaking about their experience in Life Volunteerscapes in the panel. And being a volunteer was a culture exchange, helping each other, learning how to live in a community, learning how to live in very isolated communities, having team spirit, loving nature conservation, friendship, autonomy, self-discovery, etc. So about the results of the Life Volunteerscapes, the results that I'm presenting here today, it's about the project as global and not just for Montes. So for the conservation indicators, we restored and protect 240 hectares, most of it inside the Nature 2000 network. We planted native trees, more than 87,000 trees. We produced also in nurseries native trees to be planted afterwards or for future actions that we had. We maintain paths in some partners specifically for tourism use, and for other partners for accessing management areas, which is the case in Montes. We control invasive species, restored and protected the riparian galleries areas. And this could be either with natural engineering, with a part of vegetation, or actually conservating species on the water lines. For the community enrollment goal that we had in this project, we managed between all the activities that we developed, which was more than 400 activities, we involved more than 23,000 people, and 18 private landowners were involved in this project too, and more than 400 entities. So as I said before, Montes in specific, we managed to engage we managed to engage 7 more private landowners in the work that the association develops. And from the start of the project until the end, we increased 4 private landowners, 4 more properties. Okay, regarding the volunteering goals, as I said before, we had the goal of receiving 175 volunteers with this project. We managed to engage 240 normal volunteers, so the ones that only stayed with one association, and 17 joint volunteers, so the ones that rotated between each association. It was a bit difficult for us throughout the project to try to engage the volunteers with the joint volunteering program. We got a little bit better at it by the end, but we took some lessons learned on how to engage the volunteers with these specific types of programs. So the volunteers that we received corresponding to doing more than 18,000 days of volunteering, and the joint volunteering ones more than 1,300 days. We received more than 40 nationalities. We didn't only receive volunteers from Europe. The only condition was that they were a resident in Europe, so we could receive from other nationalities. We did. We received from Bangladesh, from Brazil, etc. And we have an overall satisfaction rate from the volunteers that engage with the project of 80%. So I'm just going to show some pictures of the tasks that the volunteers did throughout this project. In the first picture on the left, we had Monti's volunteers working for a crowdfunding that we did that was part of the ELCN project also. So some plantations, conservation of bird life, maintenance of structures and tourism paths for nature conservation, control of invasive species, plant production, support of natural regeneration, other bioblitzes and community conservation activities with experts on the area, more controls, working on the dunes to rehabilitate ocean ecosystems. So some more pictures, and basically we then with this project we learned more how to work with the volunteers and how to keep volunteers for such a long. What did I do? Sorry. No, here. To work with the volunteers and how we could keep these types of programs for being long term. So we do have in Monti's volunteering days and work camps, etc. But they are all short-term volunteering activities, and it was very enlightening for us to work with this project to understand how we could keep the volunteers motivated throughout long periods of time, which is what we need to manage the land. So it depends a lot on these volunteers to do all the conservation work that we do in the lands, and we need to keep them motivated. So we took lots of lessons learned in this project. The volunteer recruitment, how to do it in a continuous way to keep the volunteers engaged with the project, how to fast receive them, but with all the necessary information given to them so they will be comfortable coming, keeping them motivated. So working with nature conservation, it's very repetitive at some times. We work a lot with how nature progresses and with the natural processes. So during winter, for example, we mainly do plantations and sowings of native trees seeds, and this can be quite a repetitive work. So for a volunteer that is with us for this period of time, it was very important for us to understand how we could motivate them and how we could adapt the tasks that we gave to them specifically to each volunteer and their interests, of course, always related to the work that we need to do in the properties. The availability that we provide the volunteers was also a lesson that we had to learn how to be flexible. So expecting them to be flexible with us, with the schedules, and when we need to work more hours or we need to keep up with the plannings, and give that flexibility back for them. So if they need to take more days off or something like that, we would be flexible as well. And the follow-up and logistics of the volunteers was also a point that we worked during these 3 years, how we would follow them, how we would manage the expectations before they came, after they were here, and after they went away, because we kept in touch with many of them, and some of them still ask how are the properties, how is the the work that they did evolving, etc. And this was a very important point that we worked on, the management of expectations of each volunteer. And I think that's it from my part. I hope I keep with the timing. Thank you very much for hearing me. And on the next part, I will be able to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obrigado, Margarida. It doesn't happen very often, but today all the panelists were on time. So we have plenty of time for questions. We have received a good bunch of questions through the chat. I also have some questions for you. So we're going to start these questions and answers. I'm going to start with you, Sarah. Yeah, we have questions for you. So we have 3 questions. I'm going to start with 2. So Sarah, how do you finance the work of your organization, and how did you start the organization of the international work camps, and how interested volunteers can find you?
Okay, so starting with the first one, how do we fund our association? So the main funds that we have come from European projects, mainly Erasmus+, but we also have some national projects, and some of the funds also come from some services that we provide, like consulting for public and private entities, like environmental activities that we are asked for. We also have some donations and memberships. So those are the main sources of our fundings. Okay. And about the international work camps. Yes, so the international work camps, they are co-founded by the Portuguese Institute of Youth and Sports. So it is connected with a network of other youth institutes around Europe and all over the world. So they make the connection between the other institutes in the other countries, and volunteers get to know about our international work camps through the youth institutes that they have in their own countries. These Portuguese institute, they co-found our international work camps, and usually we do the international work camps in partnerships, for example, with the municipalities that can also co-found and help us with everything that we need with the work camps.
Okay, thank you. I still have one more questions for you. Quite interesting, actually. How do you make management agreements with the students, owners, and local volunteers?
Okay, so starting with the students, we have also a volunteering program with also the Portuguese Institute of Youth, and volunteers, they actually get paid to come to the volunteers, because it is co-founded with this Portuguese Institute. So we get to the students through this, not only through the Portuguese institutes where we can have and receive volunteers from all over Portugal, but we also put it on our social media, and people get to know about it, and then they register in this institute, and then they come to us. Or we can, because we have a lot of volunteers that help us more frequently, they are from the university, so they spread the word about the volunteering that we are doing, and then they get to us. About the owners. So here in where we work, most of the owners, they are very old owners. So what we do is a verbal agreement for now. We talk to them, we explain them, we have the help of these older people that are familiar, connected with some of our members. So, and they have lived then forever, so they know the owners, so it's easier to get to them. And we, for now, don't have like a signed protocol. We just do verbal ones, and it has been working very well. We think that if we would get to them with this official paper, they would feel like losing the lands, and we don't want it, because we don't really want the lands, we just want to managing, and for now it's working. But if in the future we'll need these officialized, like signed protocols to apply for fundings or for projects. We will have to work with the lawyers to have official protocol. And if that time will come, we think that now, because the owners already know that what we do is for real and we are not taking their lands away, we are just managing in a great way. So I think that if the time comes, they will sign this protocol. But for now, it's just verbal agreements.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very, very much. There's quite a lot of questions, which is good. Just in case, Carolina, who is the champion of steering committees like this, if I forget something, you can tell me. We're going to continue with Pablo. I had a couple of questions, but before we're going to start with this question that you can see in the chat as a preparatory project. What would you have to say to the LIFE program about the future calls, engaging with the model that was used with the LIFE ESC project, or finding a new model?
Well, that's a question that we've been talking with other organizations around BirdLife, such as PEA or LIPU in Italy and Portugal. I mean, it's been a real pity that after all the effort done 3, 4 years of working, as Margarita said, you managed to focus all your effort after a whole experience of 2 years in the last year, and everything is working fine in the last year. So all the effort done, if suddenly the financing disappears, and also not only disappears, it just goes to the other side. Then European Solidarity Corps start to have their own budget, but their new calls are totally different than what used to be. So in the end, you have done a very, very big effort, and all the preparatory learn lessons you have, you feel like it doesn't mean anything, or it doesn't work for anything. So it's very, very disappointing on this side with the change they have done.
Okay, Pablo, I have a couple of questions for you. The last part of your talk was very, very interesting. Well, because I have been volunteering abroad. So you talk about differences versus North and South. Yeah, that basically in the North, if you volunteer, that gets recognition, that helps with your career. You have already mentioned something of how to change it, but could you tell us how do you think we could change that differences between North and South?
Well, from the point of view of an NGO, it is quite difficult. I mean, you have to the main problem that we have with that situation is the socio-economic difference between countries. Whereas in Northern Europe, most of the young people, once they finish university or school, they feel like they have to do a sabbatic year or a traveling year or something like that to learn, and their families find it quite okay with that. If you go to at least Spain and probably Portugal, Greece, and Italy, they find if you are an 18-year-old and you want to do that, your parents will probably say, no, you have to work. No, you have to find a way of earning your life. And that experience that will give you volunteering or traveling, it is not evaluated by families, by companies, or by the socio-economic system in these Southern European countries. So what we can do, try to influence on those different factors that we have power to do it. So.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. And my last question for you, you have already said that discussion about volunteer, is it unpaid work? Is it not? From your organization, how do you deal with that, or what you reply every time you are asked, oh, those are unpaid workers?
Yeah.
What do you reply?
Well, we have in Spain, we have a volunteering law. So we always follow those rules. One of the main rules is that you cannot ask for a volunteer you cannot ask for formation in a volunteer. I mean, you cannot say if you want to participate in this volunteering position, you have to know how to speak English, you have to know biology, you have to know whatever. You just, because what you give to the volunteer mainly is formation. So come to us, then we give you formation, and if you are happy with it, keep on with your work. But you cannot ask for a position, because that's work. So mainly we focus on this situation and try to avoid those kind of situations.
Okay, Paulo, thank you very much for your reply. We're going to move on. We're going to go to Margarida. So yeah, we have some questions as well for you. Yeah, the first one is what factors are taken into account of the satisfaction rate for volunteers? You said that 80% of your volunteers are happy, but how do you measure that?
Yeah, so we made a satisfaction survey for the volunteers, and you would take in account the differences on the diversity of tasks that they will do, the accommodation that they would receive if they did receive accommodation. Actually, I'm going to open my survey so I can give a better.
Right. That's yeah, that will help your explanation.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, so we get them to talk about the activity developed. So if they had a general interest on the tasks that were provided, the tasks of variability, tasks adequacy, observed results that they would see in the field, and that was one of the points that we put that had lower. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the words in English today.
You can tell in Portuguese and the others can translate.
They had lower input because working in nature, as most of you must know, it takes a long time to see results. So in these 3 years that they would be here, it was not long enough for them to see something happening. So acquired knowledge, general satisfaction overall of the project, enrollment with the community, enrollment with the association, and this part of the enrollment with the community and the associations besides Montes, in our case, also had a lower input from the volunteers, especially on these last 2 years because of COVID, as we had to stop the activities with the general communities. So, yeah.
Okay. We have more questions for you. So the next one is you talk about 440 external entities. What do you refer to? Do you refer to other local NGOs, young associations? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so yes, it was local NGOs. So we did, for example, I'm going to talk about again Bioliving because Sara is here, but it was one of the ones that we worked for. We had local associations as well here from Vozela engaging with the project. So what I meant for external entities was all the associations, public, municipalities, companies, etc., that work with the project, and they were not foreseen on the application. So it was outside of the 9 associations that were beneficiaries of this project. We had associations for social associations working with us, companies that wanted to make work for plantations, etc., those kinds of that pay for a fee to plant a tree, for example. Other NGOs in Portugal, schools, we had lots of schools as well that we incorporated in these external entities. Some of the partners work specifically with raising awareness of schools and other big companies to make them understand more about nature conservation. Yeah,
that's right. And last but not least, although you have already mentioned that in your presentation, but the question is, what are the biggest challenges in your volunteering program? what will it take to continue? I understand that this means how you will make it long term.
Yeah, so Jean, if you want to add something, say, but for us, from my perspective, so far, it's the financing, as Pablo also said, because we are preparatory projects, so we were testing this and how we can work with this for nature conservation. And at the beginning of the projects, no one is very good, and we are kind of figuring out how to engage the volunteers, etc. Life Frontierscapes in specific, the application was made to receive national volunteers, and we fast learned that was not possible because we couldn't engage national volunteers to be in the project for such long periods of time. So you kind of go until the end of the project on the third year, and it's starting to go very well, and you get many volunteers at that point, and you know how to engage them and how to deal with them and how to keep them motivated to be here, and then it ends. So it would be finding a way of financing these projects after they are preparatory, because the European Solidarity Corps doesn't really give the same advantages to the volunteers that this project gave. And I found that the bureaucracy of the European Solidarity Corps is so extensive that many volunteers just give up on engaging with these projects. Like on Life Frontierscapes, the only thing that the volunteers needed to do was literally get in contact with us. We would request their details. We would make the contracts ourselves, send to them. They would come here, they would buy the tickets, come here, and that was it, and be in the project. With a normal European Solidarity Corps, you have a sending organization, you have trainings, you have a lot of bureaucracy that sometimes it's very extensive to the volunteers, and they also don't get as much money, pocket money, as they did in our preparatory projects. And that's a big factor if you are going to an association that works near a big city, having more money to sustain yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Pablo, you have raised your hand.
Yep. Yeah, I found a partner here. So in this appointment. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's also, as I said, Margarita, not only bureaucracy. We found out that when they said, "Oh, we're going to give European Solidarity Corps a new budget," then you find out that the budget that was probably for maybe one or two or three projects in the early years. And now it comes for the whole range of projects all over Europe. So in the end, you find out that what was going to be really good, it is not good anymore. Also, the requirements, as Margarita said, on how to get a quality label, how to reach for the participants. I mean, it's been a real pity. It seems like for organizations, it didn't. Our work was nothing actually for this time.
The flexibility of that the European Solidarity Corps gives about the time of volunteering, it's for us, for our volunteers, it seems also a big issue. So making them having to choose if they only do one long-term volunteering and then they can only do short-term volunteerings, that was difficult for them to deal with, because they were. We have a Ask Volunteering at the moment program going on, and the volunteers need to do 6 months, and that's a long time. So in our project, we found out that having more flexibility on the times of volunteering that they choose to do, it was better to engage them, because they could be here for the minimum was 2 months, and they could choose if they wanted to stay longer or if they just wanted to do the 2 months and go away, and we will give the opportunity for another person to come and engage. So yeah, and I think these projects, even the European Solidarity Corps, they underestimate a little bit how much of personnel you need to engage in this, because the volunteers need a monitor with them all the time, and this monitor is paid. Of course, it's not volunteer work. The bureaucracy between, you need a person full-time in the office dealing with the reports and etc. So yeah, I think they underestimate a little bit on how much personnel you need to complete these long-term projects.
Okay, thank you, Margarita. It's very nice that you have already started a discussion between you, because that was the last part of questions and answers. But because we have questions for all of you, well, we're gonna do something like it's not a game, but yeah, we're gonna ask you these questions. You have, each of you, maximum of a minute, 2 minutes. If you go beyond, Carolina will switch you off. Okay, so you have to be you have to be quick. We start with you with this question, Sarah. The question is, if you know, you have been speaking about projects focusing mainly on young people. Do you have also volunteering for older people? Go ahead.
Yes, some of our volunteering are open for the general public, but most of the volunteering we do, it's with younger people, because it's co-financed by this Portuguese Institute of Youth. So you can only register if you are between 18 and 30 years, that's why. But besides that, we also do some volunteering with the older people, yes. Okay, fantastic, Sarah. Pablo?
Yeah, the same. We have some programs for general public, but with this particular project, if it's co-financed by ESC, European Solidarity Corps, or even the INJUVE, the Youth Institute in Spain, we have to have these requirements of having just youngsters from 18 to 30. But most of our programs, any people over 18-year-old can be part of it.
Okay, Margarita?
Yeah, from our part, so we have programs again that are financed for a specific range of age, but we do work with other senior entities. Like we have had social associations that come with people with all age to engage with our volunteering activities.
Okay, thank you. Wow, you have done very well. Fantastic, very, very quick. Okay, we go with the next one. Well, it is, as you know, for our LIFE project, it is very important, private landowners. So the question for you is, what is the most important factor for the landowners to engage with, except for mutual agreement? What they are happy about, and what they don't like? Maybe you have already said something, but if you could summarize what you think, Sarah?
So the landowners are very happy because we clean their lands for free. So that's what they are very happy about. Sometimes what we see it more difficult to explain them is that we don't always need to take money out of the land. So here what they usually do is plant eucalyptus and then sell it to pulpwood industry. So what we try to explain them is that you can restore this, we'll do it for you. We'll just not take the money that you are used to of the lands, but you can take it in other way, or you can just use it to preserve nature because we have much more lands. So those are the both sides that we see when we work with the landowners.
Fantastic. Pablo?
Well, more or less the same. First, they are happy because they save money because we come there to help them, but also because we help them to value what they have on 2 points. First, the volunteers will value that land, and also they start to value that they can do something with that land in terms of natural conservation. They didn't thought about it, and they start to do some activities to sensitize people, to educate people outside of their private community, to visit them or to help them to raise the value of that land, naturally speaking.
Okay, fantastic. Margarita?
So in our case, it's a little bit like Sarah. So the landowners are happy that we work on the properties, although Montijo doesn't do a full clean of the land like they are used to. So most of them approach us because they want their land clean and they think we are going to do that, but we don't do it in the full extension of the expression of going there with a machine and cutting everything. But we do restore the ecosystems, and after some time they see the progress of it, and they don't take an income from the properties at first, like because we are not planting eucalyptus like Sarah said, but they can on the further down the line to take some income out of the trees that we are planting, or the shrubs from fruit, honey, other stuff like that. And I think our private landowners get very happy when they see the progress of the activities that we do there. And when we go with the volunteers and we have different activities all the time happening, they get very proud of it to be done in their lands.
Okay, fantastic. There's quite a lot of interesting questions. We don't want to forget. Well, this is quite, the next one is quite, of course, general questions for each of you. So are the leaders of the volunteers or the volunteers paid in general for your projects? And secondly, what training do the leaders receive to provide education information to the volunteers? Sarah?
So yes, the leaders of the volunteers are paid from the funds of the association or from the co-financed institutes that help us. And the training we get to learn with the older members of the association that have been working with the nature conservation for a very long time. So we get informal training in the field, working with them, seeing what they usually do. Before we start being leaders of the volunteers, we also go to the field with them, and we actually learn and see in practice how they do, so that afterwards we can do it ourselves as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Pablo?
Well, more or less the same. Yes, all the leaders are project staff or organization staff. And how do we give them formation? Well, most of them they have been working for the organization before. I mean, SEO has been dealing with volunteering since 1995, so it's been they have a long experience with that. And also most of them, they have been volunteers before. So that leads them to be on both sides of the situation. And they, from our point of view, that's probably the biggest advantage of that. They know how the volunteers would feel, and they know how the leader has to act in different situations. That could be some of them complicated, and some others, when you're dealing with groups, are quite easy as well.
Thank you, Pablo. Margarita?
Yes, in our case, it's the same as Pablo. So the leaders are usually part of the staff association. They are from the area what we are working on, like biologists, conservationists, etc. We do keep on doing trainings throughout our working time to keep improving our skills, of course. And the volunteers, it depends of the volunteering program that they are doing. So in case of Life Volunteerscapes, they were paid, pocket money. In ESC case as well, European Solidarity Corps, normal too, they get the pocket money. But we do also receive volunteers that are not paid. Usually we provide accommodation to them, but it's an agreement chosen between the association and the volunteer. If we don't have the means to integrate that volunteer in a project that is paid for them, they can come as a non-paid volunteer, and we usually just provide the accommodation and all the follow-up their time here.
Okay, thank you, Margarita. This question is linked to the previous one, It's more a practical question. For me, it's very interesting because I am also involved in this type of projects. So the question is, how many staff do you have to manage and coordinate a certain number of volunteers? So you have one person dealing with 1,000 volunteers, 100. So how you, from your experience, what's the number? Sarah, more or less.
Yeah, it depends. So when we have these international work camps, we have 20 volunteers coming, and we have like 3 leaders. But when we have these volunteers in our lands, sometimes we also have 20 volunteers and it's just 1 leader. But these volunteers, they are used to come, so they more or less know what they have to do, so it's easier. So it depends of the project, of what we are doing, if the volunteers are new or not. So, but the number is more or less that.
Okay, thank you. Pablo.
Well, it's more or less the same. It depends on the group, but normally for us, we will have 1 leader for more or less between 8 to 15 volunteers. Then if it's over 15, then we will have 2 leaders, but it also depends on the activity. If the activity takes place in a difficult environment, then we will have 2 volunteers. Of course, they will also lead us to the budget again of the project. So in the end, you have to prepare that in order to achieve a good quality of the activities. But as I said, normally it's between 10, 15, 1 over 10, 15, we will have to. That's a normal situation.
Thank you, Pablo. Margarita.
Well, more or less, again, the same for activities with the community and volunteers, short-term volunteers. We usually have a team leader for between 10 to 15 volunteers. If it goes beyond that, we hire someone else or another technician goes. For long-term volunteers, from my perspective, from what I found managing Life Volunteerscapes, at least 1 technician per 10 volunteers, 8 to 10 volunteers. If we go beyond 10 long-term volunteers at the same time, we need another person to be with them and coordinating their work.
Thank you, Margarita. Well, the coffee tea break is approaching, but we're doing quite well. I have one last question in this format for you, asking for a quick reply. And it's, how do we try to learn from these pilot or preparatory projects so that the findings and learnings are lost? I think that already we have raised this question before, this frustration as well. But yeah, what's your opinion on this, Sarah?
Our project are a bit different from Pablo and Margarita's project. But what we try to do, we every year we apply this Portuguese Institute to have fundings to keep doing these volunteers in our lands. And even when these fundings are over from this Portuguese Institute, we keep doing our volunteering, although we cannot pay the volunteers because we have previously done these paid volunteers. We have some loyal volunteers that will come even if they are not paid. So that's how we work with them.
Thank you, Sarah. Pablo.
Well, that's a good thing. I think we all do. It's adapt our conditions to the new conditions of the new calls of any city, even the INJUVE, the Youth Institute, or the European calls in the European Solidarity Corps, even the LIFE projects that have some part of volunteering. We try to adapt to this lesson learned on this preparatory project, but also, as Tillman said in the chat, I see that's a very good thing to do. I think we will be able, or we'll be very, very good to try to mix together in a working group to try to get a resume of what we have learned or what we can do to push forward on this project.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Margarita.
I think Tillman wanted to say something first.
Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I did.
Pablo just said, because I sent him a message and you may not have seen that. So what he was referring to was the idea that these projects that have gathered some experience with managing volunteers, and also the challenge of, or rather the discontinuation after the project funding runs out and all these things, the bureaucratic effort that goes into it. These are all very valuable experiences that I assume the Commission would also be interested in. They don't receive that kind of feedback because they perceive it as individual experiences. You know, they get the project reports, but it doesn't trickle up to the Commission, I suppose, on a horizontal level. So my idea was to use our working group to collect these experiences. We have collected success stories already, but we haven't done so for lessons learned that may be of interest to the Commission. So we could do that, draft a very simple letter with some bullet points saying this is what we have seen in these projects, and send that letter to the Commission, to the people who are in charge of designing the LIFE program and also the European Solidarity Corps. I think it's important to do that. Otherwise, they'll just never know about, you know, your frustration.
Thank you, Tilman. Thank you. So Margarita, the floor is yours.
Yeah, from my part, I think we kind of have three ways of looking into it. Either we adapt, as Pablo was saying, to the new calls that are in place, or we can try to make this reach the European Commission, because although we all make reports and it all goes on the reports, what we learned, what we didn't learn, they see it as an individual lesson learned, and not as we all are saying the same thing, and this needs to be adapted in this way to achieve that. So that was an important point that Tilman said, and I think it's a very good idea that we take these lessons learned and we put it together and we send it to the European Commission so they can adapt the LIFE calls and the ESC calls to these needs. And I also think there is another opportunity. We discussed this once in the work camp that we had here with the ELCN, exchanging what we have learned between the staff of the associations, not only doing these webinars that we are doing and exchanging these ideas, but I think it would be a very interesting thing to have some kind of program while we go for a week, for example, for another association that works in this network, and then we share what we learn, how to deal with some topics, and then they teach us how they deal with the same topics, and this exchange not to be just on the paper, if you get what I'm trying to say, but actually on the field, how we would do it, because it's different reading than actually executing, I guess.
Thank you, Margarita. Pablo has raised his hand.
Yeah, that exchange idea was very good, and actually we came to it and we asked to the Commission to try to do like an amendment in our project, but they said no. But the thing was trying to contact different European Solidarity Corps projects along all over Europe and send the volunteers together with a leader to learn lessons about the other projects working in the field. But we also had an idea to make a passport that every project have a stamp, and the volunteer with most stamp, they will have like a prize or something like that. But it was a very good idea actually, and I think it's also a European value to this kind of projects. But no, there was no chance to it.
Well, thank you. Tilman, you want to? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but Joni raised his hand before me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Johnny. I've forgotten about you. Too many things at the same time.
Thank you, Tilman. Thank you, Carlos. Just to add two things that are related with Margarita's last comment. It is that to remember that this webinar is actually working as a preparatory meeting, to generate discussion and food for thought for a work camp that we will organize as a working group the next year. And the NPLC project foresees that we will have various work camps, hopefully, in different countries. So this idea of bringing people, volunteers and technicians that work with volunteers from one country to another, to change experience, pose questions. I think it's really central and it's really, really important. And we are also trying to address this within the project and the working group.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yoni. Well, I can't see any hand raised. I'm not sure if any of you have more questions. The last part of before we go for the tea or coffee break, the last part is about well, we although the panelists have already spoken between themselves, we wonder whether you have questions between you guys, something that maybe you want to share. It's not mandatory, but if you have questions in between, please do. But again, I'm not sure if because you have already shared some of the views, but if you have something to say or to discuss, or any more frustrations, or something to demand, or criticism to this workshop, whatever. So go ahead, Pablo.
No more frustrations. Just thank you again for having us. I think it's been great. I miss actually. I think for me to be here, it was thanks to the live platform meeting we had in Estonia, probably with all the projects on volunteering, and it was great to be there. We met each other, and it led us to be in different working groups, different working camps, and different meetings. So I think it's really great to have different projects in this kind of meetings. So again, thank you for organizing. Thank you for having me here, and hope to participate again in some others that we will organize, or some other people here can organize. I'll be really happy to participate.
Thank you, Pablo. Muchas gracias. It has been a pleasure, and very good information for us. Thank you. Well, this looks also like a goodbye or see you later. I don't know if Margarida and Sarah, you would like to share something?
Yes, I would also like to thank you for the invitation for us to be here. And it was very interesting because at least the projects that we have had until now, it's a little bit different than the ones that you two presented. So it was very interesting and very valuable, the things that you said for us, and maybe we can put it in practice in further time. So thank you so much as well, and hope that everything will go well with you and your projects. Thank you.
Obrigado, Sara. Margarida.
My part, saying thank you as well for having me presenting the Life Volunteer Skypes, and for organizing this webinar and this workshop. I'm excited to see the rest of the workshop from today and tomorrow. And good luck with the projects, and I hope we can continue this exchange of views and trying to improve volunteering for nature conservation in Europe.
Okay, obrigado. Thank you, Margarida. Clap. Well, we're gonna take a coffee tea break until 11:45 or 11:45 to 12. The second panel is also very exciting. Please, I recommend you stay. And I'm not sure you, but I really need a coffee right now. So we see you 11:45 to 12. Okay. Bye. Well, it's 11:45, 11:45. Yeah, welcome back to this workshop. I hope you have enjoyed your break. For me, it was necessary. Otherwise, I would have died. I'm joking, of course. It was fantastic discussion, very good information, and the number of questions and the quality of the questions were quite impressive. So well done, everybody. We're going to continue with the second panel. The title of this panel is Challenges for Volunteering on Private Land, and yeah, some of the people and organizations involved in our project, ENPLC, are gonna intervene. We're gonna start with Valerie van den Ble. Sorry, Valerie, you will have to remind you how your surname is pronounced. She is a policy officer of Nature de Ngos, conservation, nature and forestry related, and her talk is entitled Volunteering on Private Land. For many of us who are involved in the project, we are familiar with Valerie's work, but it is a great opportunity for all of you who don't know about her project and achievements. Valerie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm trying to. Can you just confirm that you see my screen? Probably not in presentation mode as yet.
Not yet in presentation, but yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Well done.
Okay. So you see the next slide now? Volunteering on private lands. Can you just confirm this is the slide you're seeing, because I cannot see anyone?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. So indeed, my name is Valerie van den Ble. So for those who would like to exercise pronouncing it, I know it's very Flemish. I work for the focal points of private land conservation, nature and forestry. And indeed, I've been working on private land conservation for quite some time. I'd like to share with you today what kind of volunteering actually exists already within private land managers, and also, probably more important for this webinar, what challenges we face. Challenges as well internally as challenges to collaborate with external volunteers on private lands. Let me first start with, maybe this would be a bit odd, but I'd like to share with you some of the characteristics of private lands. Private land, firstly, is not to be considered the same as public goods. Private lands is still private, so they are private goods where owners, private landowners, are willing to share their service for public benefits. I think this is very important if we talk about having volunteers on private lands. And so for private landowners, they kind of tend to have a vision on their land that is based on the EEE balance. So there is a pillar of ecology, but also a pillar of economy and a pillar of education. And depending on the landowner, some landowners will have a higher focus on economy, others will have a higher focus on ecology or even education. But the principal idea is that for private landowners, for instance, an economically pillar, most of the time is very important to fulfill the ecology aspects, because as opposed to nature NGOs, they are not very familiar or not very trustworthy of using public funds or subsidies to finance the ecology. Also, what is very important for private landowners is trust. So the respect for the private property is very important for them, as opposed to sometimes having the curiosity, of some visitors and the public use. So respected, this is private land for which landowners have invested in private funds, and they have some values for that land is very important. So that's why in one of the cases, which I'm going to explain later, we also have an actual protocol of conduct, and this should be kept in mind when talking to private landowners about volunteering on private land. Very important as well is that this private land has a history, it has a soul, and it is managed with a long-term vision, which means that for private landowners, the independency is very important. So they don't like to be very dependent on subsidies because they fear those subsidies might be ending, and they want to sustain the conservation as long as possible and make it feasible for maybe the next generation to manage it as well. And if they're only relying on public funds, on subsidies, this might incorporate a certain risk. So that's very important as well. And then last but not least, private landowners tend to be very proud on their lands. And so they know they have some advantages of owning some private land, but they have also invested in this. And they know that owning private land also comes with some duties. That's why they are mostly willing to share their land for public benefit or public services. I would like to introduce you to some kind of volunteering that already exists within private land managers, so within the organizations of private landowners. And there we see some different types of volunteering. You can either have some volunteers that focus on monitoring species or plants. There's volunteering that focuses more on the management of the site, so the actual labor in fields. And then there's also volunteering that has something to do rather with the surveillance of the property, with following up on management, following up on what is happening on the land. So there's 3 different types that acquire some different kind of volunteering, some different kind of works. And I'd like to divide my presentation into those 3 aspects. As to the monitoring, of course, you all know what monitoring means. It means actually counting or making registration of species, habitats, areas where species live, and those species can be either plants or animals. The private landowners in Belgium, for which I speak, already have some kind of mandatory monitoring of species. Land managers can make nature management plans since a recent change in policy. And there's already a mandatory part where they should monitor on the management they do for nature. Most of the land managers either do it themselves, or at the moment they must pay for professionals to do this. So this can be quite costly, and this is why volunteering might be an interesting aspect for these land managers. On the other hand, we also have private land managers that are hunters. They also have already a mandatory counting of their game species that they must do. And they also do this mostly for invasive species and even casualties, meaning animals, for instance, that are hit by cars on roads, because as you know or may not, Belgium and especially Flanders has quite a high density of roads through the countryside. So we do have a lot of casualties as well. So these hunters already do this monitoring on land on which they have hunting rights, of course, and they note them down in management plans too, that are called fauna management plans. And what is quite interesting, as the volunteering aspect becomes more important in Belgium and Flanders as well, one of the more local hunters organizations has already developed a new application, an app that's become very popular by hunters. But it's not only open to hunters, it's open to hunters and anyone really who would like to make note of certain species that they have come across. And so this is very interesting information for the hunters as well, to know if game species, but also other species, are doing better or less on their areas. And then last, we also have monitoring on private land that has been done by volunteers of the Nature NGO. And there was at the beginning quite some trust issues with private landowners. So to help find a way of working together, we have formed, together with government and the nature NGOs, a protocol of conduct on private land. This is mostly important regarding to use of data, because private landowners are quite wary about people they don't know who they are would come on their private lands and monitor at one specific point some species. So they might be scared that the data might be misused, or for instance, if a rare species would be detected, this would attract a lot of curious people to come and see the species. So that's why we had some kind of protocol on conduct, for instance, that those allowed to take pictures of, well, let's say the private house of the owner, that they were not allowed to use it on public websites. Also, the data that have been spotted, that they shouldn't be directed to a certain address, but that the use of the data should be incorporated in, for instance, a square hectare, so people cannot actually know if a rare species is seen, where exactly they have to go look for it, just to avoid attracting curious people who might invade in a private area and maybe even do harm to nature. Of course, this monitoring comes with a lot of challenges, especially within the private landowners organizations. Because within the private landowners organizations, we do not actually have a fully developed volunteering program, as opposed to the nature NGOs, who are far further in this volunteering. Another challenge, as you also already picked up on, is the historical trust issues between private landowners and nature organizations. There's always some kind of us mentality versus a they mentality. And I hope this project will help into developing a more of a we mentality. We can work together into this monitoring and the volunteering aspects. And then last, I already mentioned it, the respect is of course a very highly important aspect, especially for the monitoring of private lands, because we tend to have a lot of volunteers from everywhere that come with their binoculars and their papers to write down which kind of species they see. And it is very important to keep in mind that sometimes you are on private land and you should respect it as private land. And for the second part of the volunteering, there's also the management, so the labor in the field, as I said. For most nature management, private landowners tend to do the management themselves, or either they ask some friends over to help them, or in most cases, they still pay professionals to do the management. In Flanders, we also have the so-called forest groups. It's a groupment of professional people that are involved in forest management. They are subsidized by government, but their board of administrators are also formed with private landowners. So this is very important for private landowners to become members of those forest groups. Those forest groups, they also provide, amongst many things they do, volunteers that can be put to work in the smaller maintenances of forestry. For instance, they'd also do preparations for cuttings, like marking trees, but to also go about mowing herbs around new plantations so those plantations can grow more easily. They also would, well, removing as well as putting game protection around trees to protect those trees from being eaten too fast. But they also do planting of hedges, removing litter, and sometimes they also help for the firewood exploitation, for which I told you in the beginning. This is an economical asset, but it is also important because the economical value of a land would also allow to pay for extra costs that are made to create more biodiversity within those forests. And so those forest groups, their working of the volunteers is based on some kind of regular meetings in which they search to educate their volunteers, and they also do prospection of possible new volunteers. They work with forest consultants, so they don't have a broad volunteering working as the nature NGOs we already heard earlier this morning speaking. So what they try to do is they try to educate forest consultants, so volunteers, who can take a smaller group of more newly volunteers into the fields and help them to do some kind of activity. What is also being done by those forest groups, they also fill in some kind of social pillar with their volunteers. Sometimes they are asked by some kind of organizations. For instance, recently there was the involvement of people who were in revalidation of some kind of illness, who were encouraged to go outside, do something in nature for their health. And so those forestry groups also provided in some kind of volunteering. So they would do like small works, some kind of walking in nature, seeing and learning something about nature, but mostly in function of the revalidation of those people who were confronted with an illness. Then another part of private land managers who are working around management are the hunters. We will have someone coming to speak tomorrow about the hedge planting action that the hunters of Limburg are doing each year now, and it's expanded already to the whole of Flanders. So it's become very popular. Each year, the hunters, of course, they're in touch with a lot of landowners. They would scout landowners to see where they can improve biodiversity. And then the Hunters organization is arranging, based on volunteers, of course, a whole action where they would buy planting materials. The hunters would actually pay for those hedges themselves from their own private money. And they would go into the fields with as much volunteers as they can find to go plant these on private land. But the hunters also, mostly in spring, they have a litter action where they go around in their hunting areas, seeing, and there's a lot of litter lying around the roads, and they would collect them every spring to get rid of it. They also do some kind of management, especially for game. So they have, for instance, areas of agricultural areas where they come to agreements with the owner, or sometimes they own the land themselves, that they manage in some kind of more biodiverse way. So game, but also other species would benefit from areas where they can hide in spring and summer, where they can raise their chicks and have specific plants that are good to raise chick food, like insects. And also they would make sure that there is food for different kind of bird species during winter, when seeds become very scarce. So in that way, hunters also try to do some kind of biodiversity upscaling, even though they do not always own land. The challenges in the management are mainly to be found within the private landowners in the education. Of course, education is important to have people and volunteers that know what to do within the management, which kind of work they have to do, how they have to do it. I heard one of my colleagues telling that basically at one point you had to explain to a volunteer they had to plant a tree with the roots down and completely covered with dirt. But of course, you need people to be around some kind of new volunteers to explain most everything sometimes. Another challenge, of course, is insurancy. If you want to work with volunteers, there's quite a lot that comes with it. So you can't, basically as an organization, you can't just have a call, ask volunteers, do you want to do something? Of course, you need some kind of insurancy in case of accidents. And then another point that was already talked about before, provide incentives for volunteers. Volunteers, of course, they put in a lot of effort to come to a certain area, do some management. And so if you can provide some small funding for the volunteers to pay for their fuel or for the trajectory they have to do, the time they have to invest, and approximately, I'm sorry for the space that is wrongly put there, but within the forestry groups, they think about, or they pay about 35 euros per day for their volunteers. Volunteering working groups are not established everywhere in Flanders. So Flanders is very small, but we see that volunteers in general, volunteers who work for private landowners, they'd like to stay in their region. Mostly they don't like to go too far to do some kind of volunteering. And then, of course, it is important to have a very good balance between not having to do too much work, but not too little work as to people, not being annoyed at the spot. So these balances are also very important to keep in mind when working with volunteers. Another part of volunteering could be seen in the surveillance. For instance, within the forestry groups, the consultants of which I spoke before, they might be responsible for a certain area.
Sorry, Valerie, you have reached 20 minutes. Sorry.
I've already reached 20 minutes. Oh my
yes,
God,
you have.
that's very fast. Okay, then let me just skip this slide and go to the next one. Well, as we were talking about it, I wasn't sure if this slide was going to be of any importance, but we discussed before the aging of volunteers. So apparently a lot of volunteers tend to be very young within the nature NGOs, but within the private landowners, we kind of see the opposite. Most of the private volunteers tend to be older, tend to be male. Most of them are actually grown up in the countryside, so most of them already have a feeling with what needs to be done and how to do things. A lot of the volunteers, especially with the forestry groups, are owners themselves, and they'd like to help other forestry owners to upscale in biodiversity or to help them. And most of the volunteers are recruited on acquaintances or friendship. So the friendship is a very important pillar for recruiting private volunteers. And then I'll quickly go to the last slide, Carlos, as not to annoy you any further. Of course, I've talked a lot about the challenges, but I think it's also important to highlight the advantages. For private landowners, the advantages that I see now at the moment is that there are a lot of possibilities for volunteering. There is a willingness for private landowners to work with volunteers. Landowners also have a certain knowledge about their specific land that they have developed over the generations. So this could be incorporated in the education part towards volunteers. Also very important for private landowners is that their land mostly comes with a story and has a soul. So they like to share this story with the volunteers, which might be an asset. Also, this might be a challenge. Private landowners tend to have a very different vision on management. You might have one landowner who thinks it's very important to do management for forestry. Another landowner quite next to it might feel that Other species might be very important. So we see a different vision on the management, which could be very interesting as well for volunteers, because there's a lot of different things to see and to hear. Landowners themselves can play a part in the consultancy for volunteers, so it might ease the workload for the organizations who do the organization of the volunteers. And of course, you also have the benefits of private hosting, the feeling that you are at home somewhere and not somewhere in the wilderness in a big area where you don't have that much connection. Then shortly still, the advantages of nature NGOs that I can see so far in this project is, of course, firstly, they have a lot of experience in organizing and the organization of volunteering. They have the know-how of how to work as well in the field, how to do the monitoring, as to how to do the steering of volunteers. Of course, they already have quite a big volunteering network, which is interesting. They know how the insurances work, which might be the best, how to approach this. And they're also very far advanced in the digitalization to organize the volunteering, as well as, for instance, do the monitoring. So thank you very much for hearing me so far. And I hope you picked up on some things from the private landowners side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for your presentation. Again, we're touching very, very interesting topics, and I understand that, well, already some questions, so I understand that many questions will arise from your presentation. Now we're going to continue with Johnny Vieira from Montes, Portugal. He's, well, one of the people involved in the organization of this workshop, and specifically within the project in this part devoted to volunteering. Johnny, sorry, I forgot to tell the name of your talk. The title of the talk, the name is Crowdsourcing for Private Land Conservation. The floor is yours, Johnny.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, so can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
Okay.
Now it's coming. Put it in presentation mode. Great landscape. Thank you. Nice working.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my presentation is about crowdsourcing for private land conservation, which actually is the title of one of the pilot actions of the LIFE ENPLC project. So I will start with a slide that I just added to my presentation, just to give you some context. But because I understand that all over Europe, this situation may vary a lot from country to country. So in Portugal, what we have right now is a situation where people from the interior of the country are abandoning land. It's not profitable anymore, so people are leaving the land, and this land abandonment generates a big problem that is the basis of the wildfire problem we have in Portugal. So I just wanted to give you this context because it is particularly important for the work we have been doing in the crowdsourcing for private land conservation. So this pilot action had two main goals. The first one was to establish protocols with landowners, with private landowners, so we could find area to manage. And then the idea was to find a pool of resources to boost the management of nature in these areas. And the main tools we found to do this were citizen science, crowdfunding, and volunteering. So I will be addressing mainly this last one, volunteering, because it's the theme of the webinar. So a little bit about Montes and volunteering. Montes has a very specific view about volunteering. And we use, nowadays we are managing around 180 hectares, like Margarita said in the morning. And most of the work we do, I would say that more than 90% is done with volunteers. So why do we do this? For us, volunteering is not just a way of getting manpower to work the land. It is a tool to involve people in nature conservation For sure, it is a participated process to reconnect people to land management. So we see volunteering as an opportunity not to revert to make a reverse of the project of the process of land abandonment, but to some extent to make people more aware of the problems that it creates and to try to go against it a little bit and to find to make more awareness about it. Also an opportunity for people to experiment conservation in practice. Many of us now live in cities nowadays, and we have theoretical discussions about nature conservation and land management, but it's very important that we keep a straight connection to the activities so we are better informed. So volunteering is also information and awareness raising for volunteers. Of course, it's also manpower, but in our experience, volunteering can actually be more expensive than professional work. This may not sound very intuitive, but we need a lot of resources to get volunteers, and volunteers need a lot of motivation, a lot of guidance. They are slower than professionals, and they do a reasonable work, but with a lot of room for mistakes and also for learning. This is particularly linked with the comments from the previous panel about the amount of personnel that you need to put up and run a volunteering program. So it's not just like a professional service. You just hire the professionals and they go to the field and they do the work. So you need to get the volunteers, you need to motivate them, you need to train them, you need to accept a lot of room for mistakes. So it's not necessarily less expensive than professional work. So volunteers, if we want to work with volunteers, we should hear what they have to say. A volunteer is someone that gives an institution or a private landowner or whoever is in front of the initiative, the volunteer gives his time with no return back. So we should always hear what they have to say. Volunteers need to feel that they are valued and that their opinions are heard. And they always should be well treated. When a volunteer is well treated, is heard, the chances that he will come again and will develop a personal attachment to the land, to that specific territory that he's been working on, these chances increase a lot. And this is very, very important, because if you look at volunteering as an awareness raising tool, as a way to bring people back to nature, it's important that these people go away with the feeling that they want to come back. They want to see what they have done. And the tasks that the volunteers do should always enrich their experience. Of course, that this is not always possible. Like said in previous sessions, sometimes they just have to do repetitive work that they just have to do it. But it's important to keep a certain variety, and it's important that people feel that they take something home with them. So, and bottom line, volunteers are never cheap manpower. So as an NGO, we work preferably and mainly with volunteers. And what we do with volunteers, we address land conservation and nature management, mostly by trying to understand what nature is already doing by itself. So understanding natural processes, where are natural processes going, where they are going, and how can we, with the less resources possible, do specific actions that can change the direction when the direction is wrong. The best way to explain this is, let's say, invasive species. So when we identify invasive species, we see that that territory will go to a direction that is less biodiversity. So it's important to address that factor, and volunteers are the way we use to do that. So in most cases, nature is already doing most of the work, and we just need to give it a hand. It's also very important that the volunteers feel this. Anyone, and you don't have to have a background on science or biology or landscape architecture, but anyone can make a difference. In the case of Portugal specifically, the north of Portugal is a very rich area, especially more near the sea in Minho. And all that landscape has been man-made. It was built by people who did not have a training, they didn't go to university, but they knew how to work land. So they literally built productivity on the soil. And this is important for a volunteer to feel that he can make the difference. He doesn't need to have a huge knowledge, but he can make the difference. So the types of volunteers we do and we did within the project, the LCN project with volunteers. We had a monthly volunteering program, which it was more focused on Montes members, but it's also open to everyone who wants to join. So every second Saturday of the month, we do a volunteering action for one day in one of our areas. And also with the LCN project, we started putting up a monthly volunteering, academic volunteering program. This program is monthly, and it's a weekend where we receive people from the university, from various universities. They come, they stay with us for the weekend, and the first day we do activities on the field, work, and on the second day we generally have a short citizen science program identifying fauna, flora. Sometimes it's accompanied by someone from a professional from a university, a teacher, or someone who is really like into one of the groups. It may be birds or plants or fungi, whatever. And the idea of this was to bring the students a little bit out of the computers and the academic part and bring them to the field, make them experiment nature conservation. And this program has had quite a good feedback from participants. And exactly because of this, students say that it's good to leave the laboratory and the academic part and feel how things work on field. So I think this is one of the most successful outcomes of the pilot action. Also, we had non-regular activities. We organized, Montes always organizes a yearly work camp. We have been able to organize 4 work camps during the LIFE ELCN project. One of the work camps was actually with the partners from the project. But these work camps are very similar to the work camps that Sarah Ornelas presented from BioLiving. So we generally have less people, and they are open. We have people from all over Europe. It's been growing, so we have been receiving more international volunteers. And it's particularly important because it's like an intensive week, and it's a lot of sharing between the people that participate. Also, we had internal volunteering program with members, and this is, let's say we need to specifically address a job. Let's say we need a website or we need to make a video. So we just contact, we have our members, we contact our members and we post the question, who wants to help with this? So this is also something we have been developing with the LCN project. Also, weekend volunteering actions is work very similarly to the academic volunteering with companies and enterprises. And it's very curious that the volunteering with companies is totally different from the other types of volunteering. Companies generally have their own agenda, their own schedules, and they are very willing to do something that they can advertise later. So it's very different to address a public that comes from an enterprise or a public that comes from members or students. It's totally different. And also the citizen science activities, mainly bioblitzes. So throughout all these activities, we go to the field, and we have a picture here of Christy, which is from Transylvania, Fundación ADEPT, which is a partner from the LCN, because this picture was taken during the LCN work camp. So what we are doing here is supporting natural engineering. It's something very, very basic, which is just using the wood to create barriers for the water. And this creates the deposition of soil and sediments, and it's like a long-term investment on soil quality. Also supporting natural regeneration. Most of the lands we manage have been burned in wildfires. for the past year. So what we do in these kinds of cases, and we prefer to do this activity than doing plantations. When the oaks burn, they resprout from the ground. So with the volunteers, we choose the best branches, we remove the other ones, so the best ones can grow faster and provide bigger trees faster and with more shadow. Also, the control of invasive species, in this case, particularly removing the bark from acacia, boosting natural processes like the dispersion of seeds of acorns by jays. Also, of course, plantations and capacity building and information actions. So with all of these 3 years of working, lessons learned so far. The first lesson, probably one of the most important, is to adapt the programs to the volunteers. Of course, as an NGO and with the management plans we have for the territory and the areas we manage, we have our own agenda. We know what we want to do, but we should never put that on top and forget the interests of the volunteers. So always try to adapt what you have to do to the interests of the volunteers. This requires more attention, it requires more resources, but it produces better results for everyone because people are betterly engaged, they are more motivated, and the final work will be better and people will probably come again. Also, capacity building is key. Capacity building provides more autonomy, especially when you have volunteers that come later, they come again. And this leads to better results and creates sort of a group knowledge. We felt this mostly not on the ELCN project, but a lot with the long-term volunteers from the LIFE volunteer escapes. It is that when you have a group that's working on a particular place for like 2 months or 3 months, it starts creating sort of a group knowledge, and technically those volunteers start becoming autonomous, even if they don't have a background on nature conservation. So, third lesson, longer periods produce generally better results. There's an adaptation phase, normally from 1 to 2 months, and it's also not just a technical adaptation, but also personal adaptation and to culture. I'm talking mostly about people that come from abroad or that come from the same country, but from a different region. Of course, when you have local people, this adaptation phase does not exist or is shorter. And then there's a learning phase, 2 to 3 months. And after 3 to 4 months, you can have a fully operational team of volunteers. So at the end of the day, and sort of bottom line for the presentation, why volunteers? Because this means more motivation, either for the volunteers themselves and for us. It's also more interesting to work with the volunteers and learn with them than just hiring a professional service and getting things done without having a lot of interference in that. So it produces also more awareness about land management issues and more involvement of civil society. Okay, so very quickly going through a couple of numbers. These are the main outcomes of the pilot action. So we were able to involve more than 1,000 volunteers, 13 companies engaged, either by financing particular actions or from coming to the field and also doing conservation works. We were able to establish 6 new protocols with landowners to manage 21 additional hectares of private land. I think this was also one of the biggest outcomes. Since we started the project, we were able to join a big number of landowners. And also in terms of income, we were able to in the project, it was foreseen that we should have a crowdfunding campaign for management, land management, but we were able to complete 2 successful crowdfunding campaigns, and we raised more than 50,000 euros. So, and this is a final reflection that I would like to leave, probably for the discussion. It is that it seems to me that volunteering can also be regarded as a way to pay for ecosystem services. So it's not, of course, that you're not directly contributing, you're not, and this also has to do with the previous presentation. Valerie says that in a lot of cases, landowners are actually managing the natural resources and making them better. And that should be somehow supported by payment for ecosystem service. So volunteering, when you volunteer, you're not giving money, you're not putting your money in, but you're putting your time. And that's also very, very valuable. So maybe we can start looking at volunteering also as a payment for ecosystem services. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm available to all questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Obrigado. Nice photo to finish with other participants of this project. It has been great, your presentation, and now we move on to the last but not least presentation from Tilman Dieselhoff, entitled Civic Engagement for Private Land Conservation, Work and Goals. The floor is yours, Tilman.
Thank you, Carlos. I'll start by sharing my screen as well. And you let me know if this works. How's this? Can you see my screen right now? Is this in presentation mode already?
Not yet.
Okay, well, in that case, I need to stop it again and try something else. How about this one?
Now it's perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Carlos, again for the introduction. I am the last speaker today, and many of the things that I have listed on my slides have already been said by others. So apologies for if I will be repetitive a little bit. The advantage is that I can keep it a little shorter because the things have already been said. I just want to quickly outline what we have planned in our LIFE ENPLC project in terms of volunteering and supporting volunteering across Europe with regard to private land conservation. I want to start out by listing a couple of challenges, and Valerie and Joni just also commented on those. Let's see if you can see this. But let me first of all point out that volunteering comes from the word voluntary, and that means it is done willingly and without being forced to do it or being paid to do it. That's the original idea of volunteering. Today, we've heard a lot about volunteering programs where volunteers are actually paid to volunteer. And this is resembling, in a way, a low-wage employment situation. They sign up their time for anything between a couple of weeks and even up to a year, and they get some sort of salary or whatever you want to call it, some sort of financial compensation. And then they are volunteers, but they work at the discretion of the organization that signed the contract with them. In the original sense of the word, this is not what volunteering is about. Volunteering would be that you are totally self-willed and you can do what you want, when you want to do it, with whom you want to do it, and how you want to do it. This is getting lost sometimes. I think as the larger the programs, the volunteering programs become, the less of this original idea of volunteering remains. And I think it's true for the European Solidarity Corps, which is almost like a paid internship program more than a volunteering program. It has this function as well, as Pablo pointed out at the beginning. For many in the Mediterranean countries, this is seen as a in-between thing to do before they advance their career. And some do it even systematically to gather some practical experience on the job that they think is advantageous for them when they apply for a job later on. So let's keep that in mind when we think about volunteering. The first one that I now want to focus a little bit more on the volunteering on private lands, because what we heard, many of the stories were from the perspective of conservation NGOs, but within our project, we don't want to look at any type of volunteering, but we want to find this intersection between what conservation NGOs can offer and with their experiences and their structures for volunteering, and what private land conservation organizations and individual private landowners can offer in terms of making their land accessible, sharing their knowledge, and adapting some of the programs that conservation NGOs are already carrying out. So The first challenge is that the objectives are not always the same. And Valerie said as much, there's always an economic consideration also for private landowners that may not be the same for conservation NGOs who see a land base more as, let's say, their potential for natural rejuvenation or to support ecological processes that have nothing to do with active management or making money off that land. This is a challenge that we have to address. The second one is the general history of mistrust between conservationists and landowners. Valerie also mentioned this. I think it has something to do with where people come from as well. A lot of the base for volunteering nowadays is from the urban population, be it students, be it retired people, be it professionals. So volunteering by many is seen as a way of interacting, with the countryside, so to speak, and having a nice day out in the field, doing some productive work there and something constructive, and then going back to their city home. Whereas landowners, and now we're talking about the landowners, that have properties where conservation volunteering actually makes a lot of sense, tend to reside in the countryside and tend to have more rural properties and less urban ones. So there is a bit of a city versus countryside divide, I think. Thirdly, this is about the expectations that private landowners may have towards volunteering and the capacity that volunteers can actually provide. Obviously, if you want to get some people working on your land, you have certain ideas about what the outcome should be. And as Joni said, volunteering is not exactly the cheap labor force that some think it to be. It's also time consuming and it needs a lot of guidance and so forth. And on the other hand, volunteers tend to have, at least a certain degree of freedom and may show up one day, may not show up one day, the other day, depending on the weather. They don't have as much legal obligations as a contractual company would have when they sign up to do the work. So it's less reliable. It's more difficult to plan the outcome because it's also laymen working on it. Sometimes they just don't know how to handle the tools and so forth. That is another challenge that we have to deal with. As I said, the reliability of agreements, there's no enforcement mechanism. If the produced the result that was desired, you can't really do much about it. And then there's a particularity about the compensation of volunteers, which I'm not sure if that's the case in every country, but I know from Germany working for NABU, this is a huge issue. If many of the receiving parties, so to speak, of volunteering works, be it companies or private landowners who want to show themselves, show their gratitude for the work that has been done on their property, they would like to give a donation, to donate money to the conservation NGO. But this is more difficult from a tax perspective than it sounds like, because in the moment you receive something for your work, you're not doing it pro bono anymore, and the a donation always, it cannot come with the expectation of a service in return. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, but it creates tax difficulties for the charitable tax status of some organizations if they receive money for the work that volunteers do on private properties. And NABU has said, for that reason, has said categorically, we're not doing these kind of volunteering for donation deals, transactions anymore. And that's, and just as the last thought for that, for the volunteers, since they're doing it voluntarily, for them, it's always nice to see that they're getting something in return and they're not being exploited, so to speak. So whereas they would like to see, they would welcome a donation, this can become difficult to actually do. And last not least, yeah, it's difficult to plan with volunteers, as I said, and in particular in the long term. My experience is that the younger generation is more difficult to plan with in the long term than older volunteers, be it professionals or retired people, because their lives are so dynamic and it's a different culture that, it's just that you don't even know if you stay in one place long enough to be able to come back and do the same, let's say, bird count next year or something like that, or cleaning up whatever, roadside or so. So that's another challenge for us. Okay, so we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, is my point here. And the question is like, okay, so why are we even doing this? Why are we trying to, find the intersection between conservation NGOs and private landowners here? Here's a few figures from German NGOs, environmental NGOs. These are 4 years old, but the picture hasn't changed much. And you can see NABU, Greenpeace, and BUND, the Friends of the Earth in Germany. They had about, well, they should have close to 2 million members by now. And that's about twice as much as the political parties have in Germany. So it's a huge labor or resource pool, I should say. NABU now has more than 800,000 members and around about 80,000 volunteers. So, if you look at the map of local NABU chapters, this is also a few years old, so it's not even complete. Bavaria looks different. This is for statistical reasons. They tend to do their own thing in Bavaria, but never mind that. What you can see, these are local NABU chapters in Germany. They're all over the place. And obviously these chapters are not run by professional staff. They're run by volunteers. So they are, in a way, the whole organization relies on the shoulders of volunteers. And very often you have the case that volunteers are managing volunteers. Yeah, so it's a double system of double layered layman system, so to speak. So what can we do about this? Obviously, NABU has been working with volunteers for over 100 years. We have a wealth of experience, and we also have a system in place to help and support this structure. One is e-learning. There's a dedicated website for NABU volunteers where they can go and they can educate themselves on all kinds of subjects. Another one is liability insurance. There's liability insurance for all volunteers if they go in the field, and also health insurance. What is it called? Accidents insurance, I think it's called. I don't know. If you hurt yourself or someone else, you're insured. That's my point. So there's a lot of stuff already happening, and it's so much a wealth of resources that we would be foolish not to try to take advantage of that in our project and try to transfer some of that knowledge. To give you some ideas of how volunteering can look like, I mean, this is a typical German tree plantation. I wouldn't even dare call it a forest. It's a pine tree plantation. If you go an hour outside of Berlin, this is a very frequent situation you could find yourself in. And there's not much to do about, nature conservation on these sites, because it's basically forestry work, and you wouldn't want to have volunteers cutting down trees, despite even if they got a safety training, that's probably not advisable to do. So what volunteers can do, though, in that case, is they can go around and monitor the woodpecker trees and just mark them like this. So the forest companies that will do the felling of the trees know which trees to spare. And it's a simple interaction between them. So you can spare the most valuable habitat trees, so to speak, that even in an environment like this, slowly but surely, you can improve the ecological value. It's a very simple way of volunteering on private land. Here's another example. This is a former coal pit in the south of Berlin. Here we in that case is NABU, but other conservation NGOs do the same, work together with the operator of the mine and help them plan the recultivation of it or manage the land while it's in transition, so to speak. Part of it is still operational, and part of it is already out of use, but not accessible to the public yet. So volunteers in that case get a special permit to visit the place, to monitor the plants and animals and so forth, and consult the landowners on how to develop the site. So consultation services, it's a bit similar to what what I showed before. This is a bit more complex, and it's about also allowing for temporary nature to develop, because many of these landscapes in the open coal mine region will still undergo drastic changes. So it's sometimes about finding temporary habitat for some species that are adapted to these kind of temporary conditions, and identifying them and saving them, or actively managing these sites. Here's another example. These are sheep grazing a pasture somewhere in eastern Germany again. These sheep, you know, they belong to a shepherd, but the shepherds nowadays cannot live off having a few sheep here and there. They have to live off public support from nature conservation funding programs. However, you know, these people are, you know, not very educated or so, and they have a hard time finding the right money and the right person to talk to in the ministry. In that case, the volunteering consists of making these connections. So here we are on private property. We have a landowner who says, you know, I don't mind if someone, or actually I'd be welcome if someone can take care of my pasture. I have no animals and myself anymore. I have no time to keep it open. It only costs me money, but I don't want to turn into a forest either, because it would lose its aesthetic value or even its economic value as agricultural land. So the conservation NGO in that case just becomes the mediator between the shepherd, who's willing to graze the landowner who's willing to open the land to the shepherd, and the ministry who's willing to pay the shepherd to do this. And it's a kind of a, you know, a networking function that we take there. So without some ideas of what volunteering can mean, it's not always just hands-on business, but it can also be these kind of consultancy and transactional functions that conservation NGOs can take versus private landowners. So what can we do as LIFE ENPLC? We set out a couple of goals in our application, and they were all based on the state of, let's say, knowledge that we had at the time, much of which came from the LIFE platform meeting that has been mentioned before, the 2018 LIFE platform meeting, where all LIFE projects that deal with volunteering came together. And what we perceived from that meeting was that there was a very big interest in European-wide networking between initiatives, volunteering initiatives. So we would like to concentrate on common interests between landowners and the volunteers, identify those. What do we have in common? What do we both want? Bring the organizations together. That's the overarching goal of our, as I said at the very beginning of our project, but also in terms of volunteering, we want to network. This is what we're doing today, but we have more planned for the future, and I'll talk about this in a second. We need to manage the expectations so that there's not a disappointment on either side of what is expected from the other. And identify areas of added value. We heard before that the value of volunteering increases over time. The longer you have a volunteer, the more experienced that person becomes, and the more independent that person can also work. So short-term volunteering is not as valuable as long-term volunteering, but long-term volunteering is difficult to do and more difficult to compensate for. So without public funding, like LIFE projects, it's a very difficult task to get a volunteer willing to work for you for several months or even a year. Then Valerie already mentioned the privacy concerns. I think it's a very important topic and something where our project can hopefully help to alleviate them. Valerie, I think you also said something about the code of conduct or a contract for conduct or something like that. We didn't speak to one another before that, so I'm happy that we think alike here. It's something for the working group to consider. Then what we can do is to help matchmaking basically between those who want volunteers on their land and those who are willing to volunteer. So inform volunteers about the working opportunities. And we can facilitate the international exchange of volunteers and of experiences. How do we do that? That's my last slide. So we have a couple of activities planned and already ongoing, as a matter of fact, in the project. We are now compiling information, so we are collecting what we call success stories. I think we could also collect failure stories or difficult stories as well and see how that goes. The idea is to build a database with volunteering opportunities to connect these initiatives with one another. And then next year, to have an international workshop that Joni already mentioned in Portugal, where we'll bring together practitioners from volunteering initiatives, both from the conservation organization side as well as private landowners, to learn from one another, with the idea to develop a joint communication campaign on volunteering and to organize international work camps in various EU countries on private property. So that's the activities that we have planned in the project itself. There will be some outputs, guidance material, I think, a better understanding of what is already out there. I don't think we have to, Anita Prosser, who was also in the audience, mentioned that we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, which I can't agree more. So there's such a wealth of information already, in particular with larger conservation NGOs. I don't know why I did that. So it's more about signposting where you can already find information than trying to compile it ourselves and to rewrite things ourselves. But we'll do some guidance, develop some guidance on volunteering, and then we'll hopefully continue the volunteering campaign in the years after the project as well. That's for me the biggest challenge probably, and the biggest lesson learned today, the long-term continuation of these initiatives once the project money runs out. The good news is that we will, most of us, I think, will meet in Barcelona very soon at the Eurosite annual general meeting, which we also combine with a project meeting of the LIFE ENPLC project. And we'll have time to sit down and think about how we can continue the volunteering work that we've just started within the working group after the end of this project. We do have some resources within the project to keep it going until 2024, but after that, we should start thinking about what to do after that now. And Barcelona may be a good moment to do so. And with that, I thank you for your attention and give it back to Carlos.
Thank you very much, Tilman. It has been a quite interesting talk with many good concepts and reflections. Well, we only have this time around 10 minutes for the questions. It's not like the previous panel. So yeah, I would like you to, of course, to reply concisely if possible. We're going to start this time with you, Tilman. There's a couple of well, one question about insurance I think has been already answered. There's one question saying, can they the activities of volunteers with the small private owners? I think it's obvious, but if you want to give an answer.
Yeah, so this happens on different levels here. So most of the time, when I talk about NABU, the local groups will coordinate with the private landowners themselves because they know these people, because they happen to operate in a certain municipality or region or so, and the volunteers also come from that region. So there the connection is easy to make. It's more difficult to find people from outside and to connect them to small landowners. There we need the organizations as intermediaries, such as landowners organizations or higher level NABU chapters on the state or federal level, what we are doing basically. But the direct connection between volunteers and landowners is quite simple, and it happens everywhere.
Okay, thank you very much, Tilman. Joni, there's a quite interesting question about, you have mentioned ecosystem services. So yeah, could you also introduce volunteering work as social system service or something like that to strengthen the European countryside? What do you think?
Well, what I meant, regardless of what you name it, I was referring to, because nowadays we talk a lot about ecosystem services and about payment for ecosystem services. So it's very common to find an NGO searching for a way to implement the payment for ecosystem services to find money to manage the natural resources. So, and the idea that I was trying to bring up is that volunteering is not a way to put money in, so it's not a direct payment, but you're paying with your time. So, so it's just a way of looking at volunteering. Okay, so of course that you can call it payment for ecosystem services. You can call it something else like social system services. But for me, what is really important is the idea that you can help and pay the management of ecosystem services with your time and not necessarily just with money.
Okay, thank you, Yoni. Valerie, there's a question for you about is the Forest Group working or interested in, together with NGOs, to, for instance, get a younger group of volunteers on the ground? I don't know if you have understood the. Yeah, I struggle to understand myself, but I reckon that you have understood the question.
I think I understand the question.
Okay, good.
Yes, the forest groups, as in the there's organization who organizes some volunteering as well. I'm sure I will be very interested in hosting or welcoming some volunteers from the nature NGOs, for example, younger groups. And I think it would be interesting to have those consultants work together with younger people from nature NGOs. I think the only concern there might be is the time for the people working in the forest groups. But I think that's a bit of a problem everywhere. Of course, you need some time to coordinate all this. And I know the forest groups are they're struggling to fulfill everything within their tasks. So yes, there would definitely be an interest, but we have to see how we can make that not time consuming for the professionals within the forest group, that is.
Okay, I have 3 questions, one for each of you, because we're approaching to 1 o'clock. It has to be, again, a bit quick. So Valerie, you mentioned the lack of trust problem, which has been mentioned several times in this workshop. I wonder if you could give us examples of what things create that lack of trust, the main things when you work with volunteers, with private landowners, things that really create these problems that sometimes can be the difference in between I take part in this project or not.
Well, I could go on about that for quite long, but I think if I should be looking for one key word, I would say we have to get to know each other and each other's values. And I think if we can focus our communication on this aspect, on getting to know each other, getting to know why a private landowner might be interested in nature conservation, why a nature organization or a volunteer on either side has a certain interest, and we communicate about ways of getting there. And I think we must communicate openly about this to bring us closer together.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Fantastic. My next question is for Johnny. You are that type of person that you spend a long time with volunteers in the countryside, that you have this long experience about that. And my question is about, you have said that, it's better to have long-term volunteers. This is very broad, but how you create that engagement, that long-term engagement?
That's actually one of the hardest things to do. So I think that one of the most important things that you have to keep in mind when you're an NGO and you're creating and you want to make a long-term volunteering program, you have to be absolutely open and transparent about what you do, and you have to create trust. So if you don't have trust from people, they will not donate your time, they will not follow your work because they don't believe you. So transparency and is key if you want to build up a long-term relation with volunteers and if you want to have them back. Also, the capacity building and the feeling that from the volunteers that they take something home, and also the relationship they develop with the land. It's important that a volunteer, when he goes to work, let's say in Carvalhais, which is a land that we manage, if they like that land, you should be able to see that, and you should foster that relation. So if that guy likes to work that land, I don't know, because his parents were from there, or because he likes to plant those kinds of trees, you should explore that. Because for that volunteer, it's not the same working in that land or in Lisbon or Porto or any other land. So all these kinds of things, the relationship of volunteers with the land, the creation of trust, all this is important if you want to have volunteers that come back. Also, just let me make a very quick comment about something that Tillman said that has to do with all of this, which is volunteers should be able to decide and what they want to do and how they want to do it. Okay, of course, that's for us, that we are organizations and we need to, establish parameters and working methods and all that stuff. It's something that it's hard to deal with because it's unstable, but it's important to do that, because if you don't do it, you will lose the volunteers. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's what I was looking for. And finally, Tillman, well, we are living in a changing world. Society is changing dramatically. In some parts of Europe, the problem of the population is happening. There's quite a lot of challenges, but from your experience, like a take-home message regarding to this workshop, how do you see the future of the coming future of the role of volunteering? In conservation, in governance, other things. How do you see that the future?
I share the vision of Pablo that we are going towards a society where the civic sector will take over more of the public duties. Europe traditionally has had a very strong public focus on nature conservation. That's different in other continents, and the overall trend is that that the public role is decreasing and the private and civic sector roles are increasing with regard to nature conservation, and volunteering will inevitably be part of that. So a bright future for us as being interested in volunteering.
Thank you very much, Tillman. That's a good take-home message. Well, before I pass the word to Johnny, who will end this first day, I would like to thank you all the participants, all the people attending, and of course, Caroline and Anne-Sophie, who are always in the background supporting whatever happens. So thank you, Caroline and Anne-Sophie, and all of you. And the floor is yours, Johnny.
Well, I don't really have a lot to add. I was going to thank Caroline and Anne-Sophie because they weren't mentioned, and they put a lot of effort on the organization of this webinar. And also thank all the speakers for all the presentations. I think this was quite going with the idea of creating discussions, especially the discussions after the first panel was very good. So thank you all for coming, and we'll meet tomorrow again for the second session. Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye, see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.